It's nice doing inking to know that as I put down these darks, that this is the last time I'm going in on this particular image, that in a way it's locked very quickly. With painting, you can sort of always keep adding to it. You can always be dissatisfied with it in many ways. And with doing a pure black and white representation, I can be very satisfied with the sense of like, okay, that's pretty much it. So, the downside is I'm used to being able to use tone to define things, light and dark in full shade. And when you're trying to reduce an image down to just pure light and dark, you don't have that middle tone to rely upon for rendering, for drama, for all different ways that you're trying to illuminate the subject. And what I cheat with, which is what I'm doing right at this exact moment, is dry brushing, where you basically got a little bit of paint or ink on the end of your brush, and you're lightly going across the surface to kind of get it to catch a little bit so that you're creating a kind of halftone effect. This is a lot easier on a form I'm drawing like with the Thing, where he's got all kinds of cracks and crevices in his sort of his rocky exterior, so I can be very rough with it, whereas when I'm rendering human faces, I try and get a lot softer with this, but I still use the same approach. So in effect, me as an inker is a cheat, because I'm not actually using ink, because this is still gouache. This is jet black gouache that I'm using, and it looks like ink, but if I need to repair an area that I feel I screwed up, I can take water over this and lift up the tone and reapply and not feel like I lost a whole image. I've definitely thought about using ink for real. Some of that is just like a confidence thing, but I also am wary a little bit of just the chance of screwing something up by reaching over, and you got an inkwell there, and that could always get knocked over and then make this mess on my desk that suddenly I'm having to clean up this whole spill. Whereas water and the gouache watercolor paint, I don't have nearly the same chance of disaster to happen. Plus I've been doing it for 30 years, so I'm trying to do a page a day. If I'm more ambitious, I'd like to do at least a page and a half. And I know that some inkers could do much more than that in pages. It all comes down to how much rendering are you trying to add to the subject. I'm applying more than the average amount of rendering. Plus, like, I've got these tiny little details that I'm rendering with tiny little ink strokes. And I don't want to sacrifice that little amount of detail. So I don't have a bold line. I don't have a big fat ink line that defines everything. I've got a really fine line. Yeah, so there was a big deal basically getting the FF back in publication, and that only happened within the last few years because Marvel had chosen to not publish it until they reacquired the full rights or worked out a deal with Fox, and that's where we are now. So I was one of the people lining up saying to Marvel, like, hey, I want it. Problem is, there was one of their top writers worked it into his renegotiation of his contract to have first dibs, first right of refusal to work on it if it ever should come back. And so I had made a pitch, and my pitch was worthless because you can't compete with a contract they already made. Well, I'm terrified of what they're going to do rebooting it again, because what's happened with all the cinematic versions that have occurred thus far is they're all based upon updating it to a kind of modern aesthetic and trying to make it cool for a modern audience, as opposed to adapting the work from what it was inherently, and really taking a close eye for the way that Jack Kirby had defined these things physically is what I don't trust that they would do without sort of putting too much of their own modern spin on things. If they could set the story in the 60s, that would be a positive thing, sort of, establishing that this is where their origins come from, and then they can time travel around or get set pulled into the modern day because everything has got to be in the modern day to keep people interested. I would love to have them kind of assess the best way to truly translate this material for what it is in its original definition, but I don't know that's what's really going to happen in Hollywood, because they have to deal with whatever actors they can hire that have a certain kind of following that's going to bring people to the property. They don't do a lot of hiring of unknowns to play these characters for the most part. So I would love it if it would be these perfectly cast people that look exactly like the way that these characters were drawn. Thing is that, the fan base out there, they're a lot more forgiving than I am in terms of what they think seems to be the right casting for stuff. The format of my book will be like, it's a graphic novel, and it will be a hardcover, like magazine size format, which is not something that was possible to do within Marvel. So it is going to be published by a licensor of Marvel, which is Abrams. I've tried to base the faces off of models as close to what I saw in the comics as possible. And since I've been drawing these characters for much of the last 30 years, I've made choices before based upon wanting certain kind of things to come across, like using a certain actor's face for one version I used to do of Reed Richards, and I've become more invested in the idea that the way that Jack Kirby drew has its own subtle nuance that I need to pay more attention to and pick up on the way that he would draw certain things certain ways. And in some ways I just need to see that with a real face and see how it would correspond to Jack's style and draftsmanship. So I've kind of evolved a little bit in the way I draw. There's a lot of work that's been done in the last 20 years on the series. It's some of the finest work ever done with the comics. There's a particularly good run by Mark Millar, or Mark Miller as it's supposed to be pronounced. His work with Brian Hitch on the series was really inspiring. And after that, Jonathan Hickman worked with Dale Eaglesham on the book, and I really love what they did. There's been a phenomenal array of talent that's worked on the FF in the last 20 years, and I've been following it very, very closely. And some of which I feel like it's made me want to jump in there and sort of show what I would do, either that learns from what they did or what I would do differently.